Welcome to a deep dive into the darkest side of Christmas with Santa horror stories, where what should be a time of joy, magic, and gifts turns into absolute nightmare. Today, you will encounter accounts that challenge everything we think about Santa Claus and the Christmas spirit. From a girl who loses her sister in a mall line and encounters a grotesque, almost supernatural Santa, to stories of sinister figures lurking in trails and cabins, demanding terrifying prices or keeping victims in unimaginable situations, including decapitated heads and macabre taxidermy that resemble scenes from a horror movie more than real-life events. These shocking tales show that danger can hide beneath the most innocent appearances, that the classic figure of Santa Claus, a symbol of kindness and festivity, can be twisted into something cruel, violent, and deeply disturbing. Prepare to feel fear and anxiety every minute, because some of these stories involve physical assault, psychological manipulation, and the real terror of witnessing brutality in places that should be safe and familiar. What surprised me most personally was how these distorted figures managed to turn everyday, seemingly harmless moments, like going to the mall, walking a trail, or waiting for presents under the tree, into experiences of pure and absolute horror, leaving psychological scars that last for years. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because on YouTube, subscribing is essential. It helps the channel grow, allows you to receive notifications for new content, and supports the continuation of increasingly detailed and terrifying videos like this one. Stay with me until the end because the final revelation is simply unbelievable and will leave you completely shocked, showing that not everything that glitters at Christmas is magical, and that some stories are far darker than any decoration or gift can hide. The story of Mall Trip Gone Wrong begins seemingly innocently, with a girl and her younger sister visiting the mall for Christmas shopping, but it quickly turns into a nightmare that no holiday sparkle could illuminate. The girl, bored by the shop windows and stores, gets permission to explore the mall alone, but is forced to take her sister along, creating a heavy sense of responsibility from the start. As they walk, nothing captures her attention, but her sister insists on seeing Santa Claus, fascinated more by the concept than the actual figure. Upon reaching the booth, surrounded by artificial North Pole decorations, the endless line and the sweet smell mixed with a strange disinfectant odor begin to create a sense of unease. When the girl urgently needs to use the restroom, she leaves her sister in line with a promise to return quickly. But upon returning a few minutes later, her sister has disappeared as if swallowed by the heavy air of the place. The initial confusion soon turns into panic. Santa's helpers are cold and indifferent, refusing any assistance and forcing the girl to return to the end of the line, while every glance from the people around becomes a silent accusation, as if everyone sensed the imminent danger she feels, but cannot explain. Finally entering the booth, darkness envelops her, and a strange, acrid smell mingles with the Christmas decor, creating a suffocating atmosphere. The Santa present is not the cheerful character children know, but a distorted, almost cadaverous figure, with sunken eyes, a grotesque and disproportionate body, and a smile that resembles the threat of a predator. Every word he utters, every gesture, is imbued with an almost supernatural tension. He refuses to help the girl directly, turning the simple search for her sister into a game of power and fear. When forced to choose a gift box, something in the texture and weight of the object makes her realize that something is terribly wrong. The demonic figure approaches, his face grotesquely close to hers, and his psychotic laughter echoes through the confined space, warping time and air, making the girl feel that every second could be her last. Adrenaline drives her to run, but fear clings to her skin. Every shadow seems alive, every sound amplifies into a cacophony of terror. Finally, she finds her sister huddled on the floor, seemingly unharmed, holding a candy Santa had given her, but the relief is bitter, mixed with the certainty that something evil had been there, watching, waiting. The experience, which should have been a joyful Christmas outing, transforms into a vivid and unforgettable nightmare, marked by threat, despair, and the proximity of evil, leaving a lasting sense of vulnerability and terror, as if the true Christmas spirit had been corrupted by something that should never exist behind a smiling mask. Inside Santa Claus's booth, the girl encounters something that immediately shatters any sense of Christmas normalcy. What should be a cheerful and welcoming figure is, in fact, a grotesque and disturbing presence. The booth, once full of colors and decorations, transforms into a suffocating space with dim lights barely illuminating the floor and a strange smell, a mix of mold, sweat, and something more indefinable that induces nausea. The Santa before her is almost unrecognizable, skeletal and disproportionate, with sunken eyes that seem to pierce the soul and a thin body contrasted by an exaggeratedly swollen belly, giving him an almost monstrous appearance. He does not smile warmly, but opens his mouth in a macabre grin that reveals crooked, dirty teeth, while his heavy breathing echoes through the cramped space. When the girl tries to explain that her sister is missing, he ignores her, laughing low and psychotically, his words laden with sarcasm and threat, creating a tension that seems to tighten the air around her. Every gesture of his is unpredictable, from slow, calculated movements to sudden bursts of intimidation, approaching the girl and forcing her to recoil instinctively. He forces her to choose between 3 gift boxes, but the seemingly harmless action carries a sense of imminent danger, as if each choice could trigger a terrifying consequence. When she hesitates, he moves even closer, his face almost touching hers, the smell of rot and alcohol penetrating her senses, while a shrill laugh echoes off the walls, making her heart race. The touch of his hands is cold and sticky, his gaze piercing, and the small, enclosed booth amplifies every sound and movement, turning the simple act of looking for her sister into a psychological test of fear and survival. The sense of vulnerability is absolute. She has nowhere to flee, cannot call for help, and every second seems to prolong the anguish. Finally, obeying his instructions and picking the indicated box, Santa's presence remains oppressive, watching her every move with predatory attention, while his laughter and distorted glances give the impression that time inside the booth has stretched infinitely, transforming an apparently innocent mall visit into a living nightmare, marked by constant threat and the certainty that something profoundly evil inhabits that space, observing every movement with sinister delight. Inside Santa Claus's booth, after facing the piercing gaze and oppressive presence of the grotesque man, the girl is forced to obey an order that seems innocent at first glance, to choose one of the 3 gift boxes he offers her. But every movement, every gesture of Santa carries an almost tangible tension, as if he is testing not only her courage, but her sanity. The boxes placed in front of her appear normal, but the air around vibrates with a silent threat. The girl feels her heart race, her breath quicken, every fiber of her body screaming that something is profoundly wrong. He insists in a hoarse, distorted voice, a mix of sarcasm and veiled threat, implying that the wrong choice could bring terrible consequences, while his sunken, almost predatory eyes follow every hesitation. Trembling, the girl reaches out and selects a box, ignoring the sinister suggestion that only one is right. Upon opening the lid, instead of finding toys or ordinary gifts, an explosion of colors and shapes jumps into her eyes. Dozens of Christmas candy canes, of all sizes, some twisted, others almost deformed, as if grotesquely manipulated. Santa's presence remains suffocating, his breathing echoing as she feels the weight of psychological tension pressing down on her. With a smile mixing satisfaction and perversity, he indicates that the true reward is not the candy itself, but the clue to finding her sister. Guided by a mix of fear and hope, the girl follows the direction he points, each step intensifying her sense of vulnerability, as if walking through an invisible trap. Finally, she finds her sister huddled in a corner, seemingly unharmed, but the girl's eyes reflect the same terror her older sister felt confronting Santa, showing that even without physical injuries, fear can leave a deep mark. The sense of relief is immediate, but it is accompanied by an unsettling awareness. The grotesque figure that manipulated the moment still watches, still exerts control over that space, and what should have been a simple act of familial reunion transforms into a disturbing memory, imbued with fear and tension. The candy, which would normally symbolize joy and reward, becomes a distorted symbol of danger, and every detail of the scene, the darkness of the booth, the acrid smell, the threatening presence of Santa, remains etched in the girl's mind as a warning that In certain places and in front of certain people, childhood innocence can be exploited and terrorized without mercy, turning what should have been a magical moment into a true psychological nightmare that will echo in her memory forever. After finally managing to find her sister huddled in a corner, holding a candy that Santa had given her, the girl feels immediate relief, but it is a tense relief, charged with adrenaline and residual fear. Her senses are still on high alert, every shadow in the booth seeming to move, every sound amplified in her traumatized mind. The two run quickly through the mall corridors, clinging to each other, their footsteps echoing on the cold floor, the air still lingering with the strange smell emanating from Santa's booth. When they reach the meeting point arranged with their parents, the girl's heart nearly bursts at the sight of them. Her parents, initially confused, immediately recognize from the girl's state that something terrible has occurred. Without hesitation, the parents grab the phone and call the police, the mother's voice trembling with worry and anger as she describes the situation and the grotesque figure that had terrorized their daughters. As they wait, the tension remains almost unbearable, each minute dragging on, with the memory of Santa's piercing gaze and macabre smile still fresh in their minds. Shortly after, the police arrive, uniforms and sirens creating a surreal contrast with the mall's festive atmosphere. The officers move quickly, securing the booth's exit and questioning the grotesque man still there, now unarmed and unable to intimidate. The girl watches in silence, feeling a mixture of relief and revulsion, as the officers handcuff him, reading his rights firmly while he mutters incoherent words, his aura of threat still present but now powerless. The grotesque Santa, once an almost supernatural presence of fear, is now just a condemned man facing the consequences of his actions, and the reality that he is in custody brings a bitter sense of justice. The account reveals that, although his capture relieves the immediate danger, the memory of the encounter, the physical and psychological threat, and the sinister manipulation of the girl to find her sister remains vivid and disturbing. He faces a long prison sentence, ranging from a minimum of years to a seemingly infinite maximum, turning his figure of terror into a distant memory. Yet the mark of fear left on the girls is permanent. The experience, which began as an innocent trip to the mall, ends with police intervention, but the psychological trauma, the shock of confronting such close evil, and the feeling of vulnerability continue to haunt their memory, showing that even the presence of law cannot fully erase the terror endured, and that some experiences remain etched in the mind as invisible scars. Reminding that behind smiling masks and festive decorations, real and insidious horrors can lurk, challenging the innocence and safety of anyone who dares to approach. The haunting story begins with a young girl full of anticipation and excitement for Christmas, her eyes shining with the promise of gifts and magic. But what should be a moment of joy quickly turns into a nightmare. From early on, the girl watches her parents carefully decorating the tree, each ornament hung with care, and she herself tries to contain the anxiety that makes her run from one side to the other, biting her nails and nervously shaking her head as if some dark premonition lurked beneath her excitement. On Christmas Eve, her parents instruct her to prepare cookies and milk for Santa Claus, reinforcing the idea that reward will come only if she demonstrates kindness and patience. Impatient and unable to sleep, the girl hears noises coming from the living room and, driven by curiosity and the desire to find her presence, quietly descends the stairs, only to be confronted by a figure that corrupts all the innocence of the Christmas scene. Before her stands a monstrous Santa, a deformed entity combining the classic figure with demonic traits. Black, empty eyes, a smile revealing sharp teeth, and a body twisted in horrendous proportions. He does not speak like a human, but emits a deep, distorted voice, imbued with threat and perversity, and every gesture is loaded with intimidation, each movement reminiscent of a predator on the hunt. The girl tries to retreat, but it is too late. The grotesque Santa advances on her in an almost supernatural manner, moving like an animal, his head twisting at impossible angles as he forces the girl to confront his presence. The sense of terror is physical, overwhelming, and the girl's mind struggles to comprehend what is happening, but the reality of her vulnerability is inescapable. In a moment of absolute horror, the creature attacks, and the narrative culminates in her brutal decapitation, her limbs grotesquely wrapped in Christmas gift paper, as if the festive tradition itself had been corrupted into a macabre ritual. A note is left near the tree, written in sinister handwriting: Santa will return next Christmas, delivering a disturbing warning that turns holiday anticipation into perpetual fear. Every detail of the scene, the soft glow of the decorations contrasting with the monstrous presence, the silence broken only by subtle movements, and the metallic scent of blood and terror, amplifies the feeling of a living nightmare. The story is marked not only by physical violence but by psychological horror. The promise of joy and magic is corrupted into fear and death, showing that even the most beloved symbols cannot be trusted, and that under certain circumstances, Christmas can hide unimaginable horrors, leaving scars on the mind and spirit that will never be erased. The experience of college shortcut horror begins in an apparently mundane way, with a college student trying to find a faster route to his campus during the harsh winter, when snow makes buses overcrowded and unpredictable, forcing him to walk long distances. He discovers a shortcut cutting through an isolated forest trail, seemingly efficient, but soon realizes he is not alone. At first glance, the trail appears silent and deserted, enveloped in white snow and the bare branches of trees, yet a sense of oppression hangs in the air, as if the path is being watched. That is when the dirty Santa appears, a strange, aged man dressed in a worn and filthy Santa suit, stained by time and the hostile forest environment, a figure blending the familiar Christmas image with the grotesque and threatening. He presents himself as the guardian of the path, demanding $1 from anyone wishing to pass, turning the simple act of crossing the trail into a ritual of fear. Every step toward his cabin provokes anxiety, the sound of snow underfoot echoing like a silent warning, while the strong smell of urine, alcohol, and rotting wood fills the air, foreshadowing the terrifying encounter. The dirty Santa appears unexpectedly, shouting just one word: "Dollar!" And his sunken, muddy eyes seem to measure not only the money, but the courage of anyone who dares to face him. When the student extends his hand with the coin, the man grips his wrist tightly, pulling him closer, displaying a filthy smile and yellowed teeth, while the cold wind and the forest's silence amplify every breath and every crack of a branch, making the fear almost tangible. Upon opening the cabin door, the student realizes that the rumors about reindeer were a macabre lie. Taxidermied deer, with mounted heads and scattered limbs, decorate the space like gruesome trophies, and he soon understands that the trail of terror was only the prelude to something far darker. The horror intensifies when he recognizes the decapitated head of a friend on the wall, turning the urban legend into real, palpable terror. Each detail, the blood, the smell, his friend's glassy eyes, penetrating deeply into his mind, creating a sense of paralysis and despair. The small, filthy cabin amplifies the terror, and every step outside it feels laden with foreboding, the wind whispering warnings. The student flees, but the memory of the grotesque creature, the sticky, dirty touch of his hands, and the horror of the discovery remain etched in his mind, transforming what should have been a simple shortcut into a cursed place. A space blending everyday college life with the supernatural, where the familiar figure of Santa Claus is subverted into a threatening and insidious presence that punishes anyone who dares to cross his domain carelessly. The story ends with the sense that danger is real and constant, and that even familiar places can hide unimaginable horrors, turning everyday life into an experience of constant fear and vigilance. The disturbing discovery begins with the college student, still shaken by the previous encounter with the dirty Santa on the shortcut trail, approaching the cabin with a racing heart and held breath, each step in the snow echoing his own fear. The cabin, which had previously seemed merely a strange, filthy shelter, now reveals itself as a true den of horrors. Pushing open the creaking door, the icy air and pungent smell of decomposition, mold, and rotting sweat hit him immediately, creating a physical sensation of nausea and dread. His eyes adjust to the interior darkness, and he realizes that the figure he had thought was an eccentric old man is actually a dangerously unstable presence, a man whose sanity seems completely eroded. The cabin walls are covered with taxidermied deer heads, their glassy eyes reflecting light in a sinister manner, while animal limbs hang from hooks and boards. displaying a macabre organization as if they were hunting trophies or relics of a twisted ritual. Every visual detail reinforces the sense that violence and obsession coexist in that space, turning it into a place of tangible nightmare. As he moves further, trying to comprehend the scene, his gaze falls upon something that paralyzes his body and freezes his mind: the decapitated head of a friend, positioned grotesquely and sinisterly, the wide eyes still fixed in an expression of shock and terror that seems to perpetuate the moment of death. The dried blood and contrast with fur and wood make the scene even more grotesque, and the realization that the man in the Santa suit is a violent maniac crystallizes with brutal force. Every sound in the cabin, the creak of the floor, the wind blowing through the cracks, the snap of wood, amplifies the fear, creating an atmosphere where any movement could be fatal. The student feels adrenaline surge through his body, aware that each second in that space increases the risk of attack, and his mind struggles to process reality. This man, whom he had seen charging $1 for passage on the trail, is a killer, a predator who collects victims and transforms his own obsession into carnage and visual horror. The mixture of familiarity and perversity, the distorted Santa suit, the Christmas objects corrupted by violence, and the presence of the dead friend, turns the cabin into a living nightmare scene, where every shadow seems to move, every object carries a threat, and the sense of helplessness becomes overwhelming. The discovery not only reveals the true nature of the hobo, but also plunges the student into deep psychological terror, where the line between reality and nightmare dissolves, and the certainty that death and madness can hide beneath the most familiar and seemingly innocent appearance leaves an indelible mark on his mind, making the memory of the cabin a nightmare that will haunt him forever, as if the smell of blood, the fixed gaze of his friend, and the deformed hunting trophies could never be forgotten. The trauma experienced by the student after the horrifying discovery in the Dirty Santa cabin becomes a constant and unbearable weight in his mind, as if every memory were etched into his skin and pulsing with his own heartbeat. The sight of the mounted heads, the hanging deer limbs, and above all, the decapitated head of his friend creates a sense of horror that does not dissipate, even when he physically moves away from the site. Every detail repeats incessantly in his memory: the friend's glassy eyes, the dried blood mixed with wood, the grotesque, muddy smile of the man dressed as Santa Claus, all merging into flashes that invade his thoughts at any moment. Every time he tries to sleep, every time he closes his eyes, he relives the scene in vivid detail, smells the acrid stench of decomposition, hears the creaks of the cabin, feels the threatening presence of the maniac as if he were behind him again, ready to strike. Anxiety and fear manifest physically: cold sweat, racing heart, uncontrollable tremors, and a constant feeling of being watched, even in the safest places. Unable to bear the psychological weight, he takes drastic measures to preserve his sanity, transferring to another university, moving to a different city to distance himself from anything that could remind him of the trail and the cabin, and completely changing his course of study, abandoning his previous routine now associated with the trauma. Even after these changes, he avoids any path resembling the shortcut, isolated streets, trails, or woods, as the mere thought of walking through that space again triggers an immediate wave of panic. The memory of his decapitated friend and the grotesque taxidermy does not fade. On the contrary, it persists like a constant shadow, distorting happy memories, turning ordinary places threatening, and transforming everyday experiences into potential dangers. Every sound at night, every shadow on the sidewalk, every crack in the wall of an empty room can evoke the same terror, and paranoia becomes a constant companion. The student's life reconfigures around fear shaped by an experience that shattered innocence and forever altered his perception of safety and normality. The violence of the world, the fragility of life, and the perversity of someone hiding beneath a familiar appearance are now inescapable realities, and even years later, the trauma remains active, infiltrating thoughts, dreams, and decisions, ensuring that the horror of the cabin and Dirty Santa continues to haunt him, a persistent, invisible presence that will never be fully forgotten. Every choice of path, every social interaction, every shadow in his new routine is touched by the echo of trauma, a reminder that certain experiences do not fade, and that fear and the memory of the grotesque can become an indelible part of a survivor, transforming everyday life into a minefield of memories and constant anxiety. The unresolved mystery carries a dark weight that never fully dissipates in the student's mind. Even years after the traumatic events, the trail, the cabin, and the man known as Dirty Santa remain symbols of latent danger and unexplained horrors, an invisible presence that seeps into memory and emotions like an endless shadow. The decapitated head of his friend, found among the macabre trophies and deer taxidermy, remains without a definitive conclusion, and every time the student thinks of the incident, the unsettling question arises: what really happened to him? Was it the final death, or was there something even more disturbing that will never be revealed? The absence of concrete answers transforms fear into something diffuse and constant, a latent anxiety that cannot be erased. Each step in isolated areas or unknown trails evoking memories of the cabin, the acrid smell of blood and decay, his friend's glassy stare, and the grotesque, muddy smile of the man dressed as Santa Claus. The figure of Dirty Santa remains shrouded in mystery. No one knows whether he continued to inhabit the trail, if he was captured or punished, or if he simply vanished, making the forest and the shortcut themselves places imbued with tension and suspicion. Every strange sound, every shadow in the snow or among the trees triggers anticipatory panic, as if the maniac were still lurking, ready to punish the unwary who approach. The uncertainty prolongs the student's trauma, making the feeling of safety impossible, as the unknown and the inexplicable hold overwhelming psychological power, creating the impression that the cabin and trail are portals to something beyond the ordinary, where violence, death, and madness converge permanently. The silence of the forest, the biting wind, the snap of dry branches, all become reminders of a danger that cannot be measured or predicted, and the mere thought of the trail sends shivers down the spine. The mystery extends not only regarding the fate of the friend, but also about the true nature of Dirty Santa and his actions, leaving room for fear of the unknown and speculation that other victims may have been taken without anyone ever knowing. The place, seemingly ordinary and mundane, becomes a potentially cursed territory where perception of reality is shaped by traumatic memory, and the line between safety and threat becomes permanently unstable. The story leaves a lingering sense of unease, an invisible shadow that follows any reference to the trail, the cabin, or the forest, reminding that some experiences remain unresolved, keeping the horror alive in the minds of survivors and planting the seed of fear and paranoia in anyone who dares to imagine what truly happened, creating the impression that the unknown is even more terrifying than what is already known. The recurring theme of the video revolves around the subversion of what traditionally should be a time of joy, warmth, and celebration, transforming iconic Christmas figures such as Santa Claus into agents of terror, suspense, and psychological trauma. In various stories, both real and fictionalized, the character of Santa Claus, who normally symbolizes generosity, safety, and childlike magic, is corrupted into something grotesque, threatening, and unpredictable, creating a disturbing dissonance that plunges the viewer into a constant state of anxiety. Each narrative explores different forms of violence and fear, from an innocent visit to the mall, where a girl encounters a distorted, grotesque, and almost supernatural Santa, to urban encounters with marginalized or sinister figures like Dirty Santa, who turns a simple shortcut to the university into a trail of dread and potential death. The construction of suspense is meticulous, using everyday elements, lines, corridors, trails, Christmas trees, familiar decorations, to amplify discomfort, showing that terror does not reside solely in explicit monsters, but also in the corruption of the familiar and safe. The tension is heightened by the contrast between the expectation of festivity and the reality of danger, making every environment, whether a mall full of lights, an isolated cabin, or a decorated living room, like a stage for imminent horror. The stories delve deeply into the psychology of their characters. Fear, anxiety, guilt, responsibility, paranoia, and trauma are explored in detail, demonstrating that terror is not limited to physical threat, but extends to permanent mental consequences, altering routines, decisions, and even life paths. The sense of vulnerability is constant, as any seemingly innocent situation can become lethal or traumatic. A line for photos with Santa, a simple trail on campus, or the anticipation of opening presents turns into experiences of intense, real horror. The use of distorted Santa figures creates tension that combines grotesque visual elements, disproportionate bodies, empty eyes, demonic smiles, stuffed animal limbs, with unpredictable and violent behavior, establishing an aura of threat that invades the character's mental and physical space. Moreover, the video emphasizes that trauma does not disappear when the encounter ends. It infiltrates memory, future choices, and the perception of the world, turning holidays, Christmas symbols, and previously safe locations into constant reminders of danger and violence. The repetition of this theme across the narratives creates a sense that horror is rooted in the very idea of tradition and innocence, eroding comfort and trust, and showing that terror can arise in the most unexpected places, involving viewers and characters in an intense psychological experience. Each story, by exploring the transformation of Santa Claus from a familiar icon into a threatening creature, reinforces the idea that fear can camouflage itself in everyday life, and that the human mind, when confronted with the grotesque and unexpected, is as vulnerable as the body. The convergence of real and fictional accounts in the video generates a cumulative effect, amplifying tension and vulnerability, transforming Christmas into a setting of continuous suspense, palpable fear, and deep psychological trauma, leaving a lasting impression that behind the lights and decorations, horror can lurk, always present, always waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And so we reach the end of Santa Horror Stories. If you enjoyed feeling that chill down your spine and diving into the darker side of Christmas, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any terrifying stories. For those who can support the channel even more, consider sending a super thanks. Every contribution makes a huge difference and helps bring more scary content to you. And if you can't, no worries. Leave in the comments what you thought of the video, share your impressions, and maybe even your own scary experience. Finally, don't leave yet. Click on the video appearing on the screen now. It's even more interesting and captivating than this one, and I promise you won't regret it.